The cabin was silent. Not the kind of silence that comes with sleep or peace. This was the silence of fear. A hijacked plane, 30,000 feet above ground, suspended in dread. Passengers clutched armrests, whispered prayers, avoided eye contact with the masked men pacing the aisle. Guns glinted under flickering cabin lights. No one moved. Except him. Row 17, aisle seat. A man in a faded cap, head bowed, hands resting calmly on his knees. He hadn't spoken. He hadn't flinched. While others trembled, he sat like stone. The lead hijacker barked demands. You will comply, or we start with the children. His voice cracked with rage, but beneath it, uncertainty. Something was off. Someone wasn't afraid. The man in the cap slowly looked up. His eyes met the hijackers. Not with defiance. Not with anger. With something deeper. Something ancient. And then, he reached for the cap. The hijacker froze mid-step. The cabin held its breath. A stewardess gasped. Time slowed. The cap came off. It wasn't just a gesture. It was a revelation. The face beneath it wasn't anonymous. It was known, revered, feared by some, loved by many. Ibrahim Traoré, the revolutionary, the reformer, the man who had stared down empires. The hijacker's mouth parted, but no words came. A child whispered, "Mama, that's him." And in that moment, the power shifted. Not with weapons, not with threats, but with identity. Because when Ibrahim Traoré took off his cap, even the terrorists stopped breathing. But what they saw beneath the cap changed everything. The morning had been ordinary. A regional flight, modest in size, filled with diplomats, aid workers, and families returning home. No one paid much attention to the man in the worn jacket and cap who boarded without entourage, without ceremony. He moved quietly, nodded politely, and took his seat in row 17. To most, he was just another traveler. But beneath that cap sat a man whose name echoed through corridors of power and resistance alike. Ibrahim Traoré, the youngest head of state in Africa, a symbol of defiance against neo-colonialism, a tactician whose silence often spoke louder than speeches. He had chosen to travel incognito. No security detail, no press, just him and the mission ahead, a discreet diplomatic meeting meant to broker peace in a region teetering on the edge. But peace, it seemed, had other enemies. 30 minutes after takeoff, the cabin lights flickered. Then came the screams. Armed men stormed the aisle, faces masked, voices sharp with rage. One fired a warning shot into the ceiling. The plane jolted. Panic spread like wildfire. "This aircraft is now under our control," the leader shouted. "We demand the release of our brothers held in Ouagadougou. If our demands are not met, blood will flow." Passengers sobbed. A mother shielded her child. A diplomat clutched his chest. The hijackers moved swiftly, separating crew from passengers, confiscating phones, barking orders. And yet, one man remained calm. Traoré didn't flinch. He didn't speak. He watched, studied, calculated. The hijackers hadn't recognized him. Not yet. The cap had done its job. But time was ticking, and the stakes were rising. If they discovered who he was, the situation could spiral, either into leverage or vengeance. Outside the aircraft, air traffic control scrambled. Inside, fear thickened the air. Every second felt like an hour. And still, Traoré sat still. Because he knew what was coming. He knew that leadership wasn't about panic. It was about timing. And his moment was near. His name was Kamal. To his followers, he was a liberator. To his enemies, a ghost in the mountains. But to the passengers on Flight 7A, he was a nightmare made flesh. Kamal had spent years building his legend. A former theology student turned warlord, he believed he was chosen, not by ballot or birthright, but by divine fury. His sermons were laced with fire, his tactics with blood. He didn't negotiate. He punished. And today, he had chosen this plane as his pulpit. He walked the aisle like a king surveying his court. His rifle hung loose, but his eyes were sharp, scanning, calculating, daring anyone to challenge him. He barked orders with theatrical cruelty, forcing elderly passengers to kneel, ripping phones from trembling hands, mocking a child who cried too loudly. "This is what happens when you forget who holds power," he sneered, pressing his boot against a diplomat's chest. "You think your governments protect you? They don't even know you're up here." His men laughed. Kamal didn't. He wasn't here for amusement. He was here for leverage. The demands had already been sent. release of 5 imprisoned fighters, public apology from the Burkinabe government, and a televised statement acknowledging his movement's legitimacy. He believed fear was currency, and he was rich. But Kamal was not without contradictions. He claimed to fight for justice, yet his methods reeked of tyranny. He spoke of liberation, yet held innocents hostage. He preached purity, yet trafficked arms with foreign mercenaries. His ideology was a mask, one he wore so tightly, he'd forgotten the face beneath it. Still, in his mind, this was victory. The plane was his. The world was watching, and no one dared defy him. Until row 17. He'd noticed the man in the cap. Quiet, unbothered. Kamal had assumed he was just another coward, the kind who folds under pressure, who prays for rescue but never resists. He hadn't looked twice, but something gnawed at him. The man's posture, his eyes, the way he didn't flinch when Kamal shouted. It was subtle, but it was there, a presence Kamal couldn't explain. He approached slowly, rifle lowered. You. What's your name? No answer. Kamal leaned in. I said, what's your name? Still silence. Passengers watched, breathless. Kamal's men shifted uneasily. This wasn't how people reacted to him. This wasn't fear. It was something else. Kamal grabbed the man's shoulder. Speak. And then, the man looked up. There was no rage in his eyes. No panic. Just calm. Deep, unshakable calm. Kamal stepped back, unsettled. The man reached for his cap. Kamal's heart skipped. He thought he controlled the cabin. Until the man in the cap stood up. Before the world knew his name, Ibrahim Traoré was just another young man in Burkina Faso, quiet, observant, and fiercely principled. Born into modest means, he grew up in a village where the soil was dry and the future uncertain. His father was a schoolteacher, his mother a nurse. They taught him that dignity wasn't inherited, it was earned through service. He joined the military not for glory, but for duty. In the barracks, he was known for his discipline and silence. He didn't speak unless he had something to say. But when he did, people listened. His rise through the ranks wasn't meteoric, it was methodical. He studied strategy like scripture, treated subordinates with respect, and never asked of others what he wouldn't do himself. Then came the insurgencies. The country was bleeding, torn by corruption, foreign interference, and extremist violence. Traoré saw villages razed, children orphaned, and promises broken. He led missions into hostile terrain, not just with weapons, but with conviction. He believed the uniform meant more than authority, it meant accountability. But it wasn't just the battlefield that shaped him. It was the betrayal. He watched leaders enrich themselves while soldiers died underfunded and civilians starved. He spoke out, quietly at first, then louder. Reform wasn't a slogan to him, it was a necessity. And when the time came, he didn't seize power. He answered a call. In 2022, at just 34, Traoré became the president of Burkina Faso, the youngest in the country's history. But he didn't celebrate. He didn't parade. He walked into the presidential palace with the same boots he wore in the field. His first act wasn't a speech. It was a visit to a wounded soldier's family. He cut his salary. He restructured the military. He challenged foreign interests that treated his nation like a pawn. And he did it all with a quiet intensity that unnerved his critics and inspired his people. He wasn't perfect. He made enemies, faced setbacks, and bore the weight of impossible expectations. But he never wavered. Traoré's leadership wasn't built on charisma. It was built on sacrifice. He'd lost comrades. He'd buried friends. He'd faced death more times than he could count. But this time, the stakes were different. This time, he wasn't in the Sahel. He was 30,000 feet above the Atlantic, on a diplomatic mission to broker peace between fractured nations. The plane was supposed to be safe, neutral ground. But safety is a fragile illusion. When the hijackers stormed the cabin, Traoré didn't panic. He didn't reach for a weapon. He watched. He listened. He calculated. This wasn't the first time he faced death. But this time, the stakes were global. The cabin was a pressure cooker. Fear hissed in every breath, every glance, every trembling hand clutching an armrest. Kamal paced like a caged animal, his authority fraying with each passing minute. The passengers were no longer just afraid, they were unpredictable. Panic had begun to ripple through the rows, and Kamal could feel control slipping. He barked at his men. Keep them quiet. But even they looked uneasy. The man in the cap hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, yet somehow, His silence was louder than Kamal's threats. Kamal turned toward him again. You think you're brave? You think silence makes you strong? The man didn't flinch. Kamal stepped closer, voice rising. I've buried men stronger than you. I've burned villages for less defiance. Still, no reaction. The tension was unbearable. A woman sobbed in the back. A child whimpered. One of Kamal's lieutenants shifted his grip on the rifle, eyes darting nervously between his leader and the silent figure. Then, finally, the man spoke. You mistake fear for power. His voice was low, steady, like a drumbeat in the dark. Kamal blinked. What did you say? You think fear bends the world to your will. But fear is brittle. It cracks. It turns on itself. Kamal scoffed. And what do you know of power? I've seen it. I've held it. And I've let it go, because true power isn't taken. It's earned. The hijacker laughed, but it was hollow. You speak like a man who's never bled. I've bled, the man said. For my country. For my people. For peace. Kamal's eyes narrowed. Who are you? The man leaned forward slightly. Someone who's faced death before. Someone who's not afraid to face it again. The cabin fell silent. Even the hum of the engines seemed to pause. Kamal stepped back, uncertain. His bravado was cracking. This wasn't how hostages behaved. This wasn't how fear worked. You think words will save you? Kamal hissed. No, the man replied. But they might save everyone else. It was psychological chess. Each sentence a move, each pause a trap. Kamal was used to obedience, not resistance. And this man wasn't just resisting. He was dismantling Kamal's entire philosophy, piece by piece. The passengers watched, transfixed. The hijackers hesitated. Something was shifting. Then came the moment no one expected. The cap came off. The cap dropped to the floor with a soft thud, but the sound echoed like thunder through the cabin. Kamal's eyes widened. His breath caught. The man standing before him was no longer anonymous. No longer ordinary. It was Ibrahim Traoré, the youngest head of state in Africa, the soldier who defied foreign powers, the reformer who dismantled corruption with quiet resolve, the man whose face had become a symbol of resistance, dignity, and hope. Gasps rippled through the cabin. A stewardess clutched her chest. A child whispered, "It's him." Passengers leaned forward, stunned into silence. Even Kamal's men faltered, their rifles lowering ever so slightly. Kamal stepped back, shaken. No, that's not possible. Traoré didn't move. He didn't need to. His presence filled the space like gravity. You hijacked this plane, Traoré said, voice calm, thinking you've seized power. But power isn't taken with threats. It's revealed in moments like this. Kamal tried to recover. You think your name scares me? No, Traoré replied. I think it reminds you of everything you've failed to become. The words landed like blows. Kamal's jaw clenched. You're just a puppet. A face for the West. Traoré's eyes narrowed. I've buried friends who died fighting foreign influence. I've walked through villages your men burned. I've seen mothers dig graves with bare hands. Don't speak to me of puppets. The cabin was silent. Even the hum of the engines seemed to fade. You preach liberation, Traoré continued, but you terrorize the innocent. You claim to fight for justice, but you hold children hostage. You wear a mask of ideology, but underneath it is fear. Fear of irrelevance, fear of truth. Kamal's hands trembled. You don't know me. I know your kind, Traoré said. Men who mistake violence for vision, who think chaos is revolution. But real revolution is sacrifice. It's discipline. It's standing in front of your people and choosing service over ego. A murmur spread through the passengers. Heads nodded. Eyes welled. The man they feared was now the man they followed. You want prisoners released? Traoré asked. Then earn it. Build something. Let something. Don't hijack planes. Hijack minds. Inspire. Create. Risk your life for others, not for your own mythology. Kamal was unraveling. His voice cracked. You think you're better than me? No, Traoré said. I think I've chosen a harder path. He stepped forward. Kamal flinched. I didn't come here to fight, Traoré said. I came to negotiate peace. But peace requires courage. And courage isn't loud. It's quiet. It's the man who sits in silence while others scream. Kamal's rifle lowered. His eyes darted to his men. They were no longer with him. Their posture had changed. Their certainty had vanished. You've lost, Traoré said softly. Kamal looked around. The cabin was no longer his. The fear had shifted. The power had shifted. And then, he dropped the rifle. A stewardess sobbed. A passenger clapped once, then twice. Applause spread like wildfire. Relief flooded the cabin. Traoré didn't smile. He simply nodded. He turned to the passengers. You are safe now. The hijackers were restrained. The cockpit was secured. The plane resumed its course. But the silence wasn't just relief. It was awe. Because in a world that worships noise, Ibrahim Traoré had reminded everyone that dignity speaks louder. And when the plane landed, the world was silent. The moment Ibrahim Traoré stepped off the plane, the world was already watching. Footage leaked within hours. Grainy clips from terrified passengers turned into viral gold. The man in the cap, the calm voice, the hijacker's surrender. It was all there, and it spread like wildfire. The cap came off trended globally within minutes. TikTok edits layered dramatic music over Traoré's reveal. Twitter exploded with praise. This is what leadership looks like. No cape, no ego, just courage. Instagram flooded with artwork. Traoré's silhouette, cap in hand, standing tall against a backdrop of fire and hope. News anchors scrambled to rewrite their segments. Burkina Faso's president defuses hijacking with words, not weapons, read one headline. Africa's quiet lion roars, said another. Commentators who once dismissed him as inexperienced now called him the most composed leader of our time. But the shockwaves weren't just digital. In Ouagadougou, students marched with homemade signs. We are Traoré's children. In Lagos, a mural appeared overnight. Traoré's face painted across a wall with the words, "Power is calm." In Nairobi, a university lecture paused mid-discussion to stream the footage. Professors wept. Students cheered. African youth saw themselves in him, not just in his skin, but in his silence, in his refusal to perform strength, and his insistence on embodying it. He wasn't just a president. He was a mirror reflecting what leadership could be, humble, fierce, and rooted in service. Diplomats took notice. Embassies issued statements. Peace talks were rescheduled. Nations that once sidelined Burkina Faso now requested meetings. The balance of respect had shifted, not through military might, but through moral clarity. Even Kemal's own movement fractured. Some of his men, now in custody, asked to speak with Traoré, not to negotiate, to listen. And yet, through all the noise, Traoré remained silent. No press conference, no victory lap. He returned to his office, met with his cabinet, and resumed work, as if the world hadn't just witnessed a masterclass in leadership. But the real impact was just beginning. The tension had dissolved, but its echo remained. As the plane touched down and the passengers stepped into daylight, they carried more than luggage. They carried a story. A story of a man who chose dignity over fear, identity over anonymity, and truth over silence. Ibrahim Traoré didn't need a podium to deliver his message. He didn't need a convoy or a press release. All he needed was a moment, and the courage to meet it head-on. When he removed his cap, he wasn't just revealing his face. He was revealing a philosophy, a conviction, a challenge to the world's understanding of leadership. In that instant, the crisis was reframed. The hijackers had tried to control the narrative through fear. Traoré rewrote it with dignity. They had tried to erase identity. He reclaimed it with pride. They had tried to fracture unity. He forged it with truth. You don't need weapons to lead. You need truth. His words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They resonated because they were rooted in something deeper, a moral clarity that transcended politics, borders, and fear. It was the kind of clarity that comes not from power, but from purpose. Traoré's actions reminded the world that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision to act despite it. That service isn't submission, it's strength. And that African pride isn't just cultural, it's foundational. It's the heartbeat of a continent that has endured, resisted, and risen time and time again. In the days that followed, the story spread, not as a tale of heroism, but as a lesson, a blueprint, a call to reimagine leadership not as dominance, but as responsibility, not as spectacle, but as service. Young Africans saw themselves in Traoré, not because he was flawless, but because he was fearless. He didn't hide behind titles or protocols. He stepped forward when it mattered most. And in doing so, he gave others permission to do the same. Global leaders took note. not of his rank, but of his resolve. In a world often paralyzed by bureaucracy and posturing, Traoré's simplicity was revolutionary. He reminded them that leadership begins with listening, with standing firm in truth, and with choosing unity over division. The moral lesson was clear: identity is not a liability. It's a legacy. And dignity is not a luxury. It's a necessity. Traoré's cap, once a tool of concealment, became a symbol of revelation. It marked the moment when anonymity gave way to authenticity, when fear bowed to integrity, when one man's quiet defiance became a continent's loud affirmation. And beyond Africa, the ripple continued. People from every corner of the globe found resonance in his message, because the values he embodied, courage, service, pride, unity, are not bound by geography. They are universal. They are timeless. In classrooms, his story became a case study. In communities, it became a conversation. And in hearts, it became a reminder. That truth is the most powerful weapon we have. That leadership is not about being followed. It's about being worthy of being followed. As the dust settled and the headlines faded, one truth remained. You don't need weapons to lead. You need truth. And in a world hungry for authenticity, Traoré's moment on that plane became more than a memory. It became a movement, a quiet revolution, a call to every individual, regardless of title, background, or belief, to lead with courage, to serve with pride, and to stand with unity. Because when dignity triumphs over fear and identity shines through the shadows, the world doesn't just change. It heals. The cap was never just a disguise. It was a metaphor for the masks we wear, the fears we carry, and the truths we sometimes bury. When Ibrahim Traoré removed it, he didn't just reveal his identity. He revealed a deeper truth, that leadership is not about being seen, but about being known. Known for courage, for conviction, for standing firm when silence would be safer. That moment, quiet, unassuming, unforgettable, reframed the crisis. It turned fear into dignity, anonymity into pride, and chaos into clarity. Traoré didn't overpower the hijackers. He outshined them, with truth, with service, with the kind of moral clarity that doesn't demand attention, but earns respect. In a world often seduced by spectacle, this was a reminder that real leadership is rooted in values. Courage, service, African pride, global unity. These aren't just ideals, they're imperatives. This story isn't just about one man. It's about all of us, about the kind of world we choose to build and the kind of leaders we choose to follow. If you believe in leadership through courage, subscribe, share, and be part of the movement. Let this moment live beyond the headlines. Let it become a legacy,